rejoice and come in. Enter, rejoice and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice. Join us in here where it's warm. Join us in here where it's warm. Join us in here where it's warm. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in.
Good morning and welcome to UUCC, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua. We are a group of spiritual free thinkers who gather to celebrate life, build community, and better the world. Wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you are welcome here. I'm Gigi, your worship associate for this morning, and the service today is being led by our guest, Dick Gilbert. This service is also being live streamed to our YouTube channel. If this is your first visit, welcome. We invite you to sign the visitor's book in the entryway, and whether it's your first visit or your 1000th, we are glad you are here. I have a few announcements to share with you today. Please wear a mask. Masks are available for anyone who forgot one. Unfortunately, we aren't able to sing yet, but humming, dancing, swaying, and other expressions are strongly encouraged. Childcare will be provided this morning by Pat Mells. We will be collecting the cards for joys and sorrows after our first hymn. So on your seat somewhere, you should find a little slip of paper that is for your joys and sorrows. Please fill them out or type them into the chat box on Zoom if you have something you would like to share. Are there any other announcements for the good of the community? I do have one more. We will be meeting for a virtual service on Zoom next Sunday, January 30th, with the Reverend Susan Frawley. As we prepare to be fully together, I remind you to silence your phones and devices. We now enter a space of worship. I invite you to join with me in our chalice lighting in our chalice lighting words as the flame is lit. If you don't know them by heart, they're number 448 at the back of the gray hymnal. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs.
We like this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning.
In celebration of the life we share together.
As we enter this community of the Spirit, may we remember the difficult lesson that each day offers more things than we can do. Therefore, may we learn to separate that which matters most from that which matters least of all. May we do what needs to be done, postpone what does not, and be at peace with what we can be and do. Our opening hymn is number 298. Wake now, my senses.
with the web of creation you bound, giving, receiving as love chose us out. Wake now, my reason, give out news anew. Join with the pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now, compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. Make now, my conscience, with justice thy guide. Join with all people whose rights are denied. Take not for granted privileged place. God's love embraces the whole human race. Take now my vision of ministry. Brighten our pathway with radiance here. Mingle my calling with all who will share. Work toward a planet transformed by our care.
We are a community that holds one another in our celebrations and in our pain. We welcome you to share your joys and sorrows by writing them down on the card you found on your chair and placing it in the basket when it comes by you, or by typing in the chat box in Zoom. Know that whatever is in your heart today, whether shared or not, we are with you. I now invite you don't have a story. You do? Oh, okay, you could go ahead and do your story now.
If our two children would like to come up, maybe in the front row here with Dad for a story, I'll arrange my props. These are what?
That's right, Duplo Legos.
Huge Legos, huge Legos. Okay. This is a story, maybe I better, you can hear me. This is a story from the Jewish Talmud. That's a very old book that our Jewish friends and neighbors have. It's like a Bible for them. And this is the ancient story. And I will tell it as best I can with these Lego blocks, these large Lego blocks. Once upon a time, there were two brothers. Matthew, who lived alone in a farmhouse on a farm he shared with his brother Douglas, who had a wife and 3 children. They shared the farm and they shared the work on the farm. Well, one day, as they finished their work, Matthew invited Douglas to his house for dinner. After all, he had no other family to eat with, so Douglas came over for dinner. And before they'd done that, they put the wheat, they'd harvested wheat, bushels of wheat, they'd put in about, I think that's about equal amounts. Here, let's see if I can get it. Yeah, it's just about equal amounts. About 60 bales of wheat. And then Matthew went home and he got thinking, you know, my brother Matthew, he works very hard and he has a wife and 3 children to feed. I don't deserve half the bushels of wheat. He deserves more because he has more to feed, more people to feed. And so what Douglas did very late that night, he took 60 bundles of wheat, and this is 60 bundles of wheat, over to Matthew's barn and put it in his barn. Meanwhile, Douglas had been thinking, you know, poor Matthew, he lives all by himself in that one farmhouse, in that one farm. And I have a wife and 3 children to help me, and he has no one to help him. I think he deserves more bundles of wheat. And so late that night, he went out to count his bundles of wheat and he said, gee, we must have counted them wrong because I have more wheat than I thought we had. We divided them up evenly. And so in the dark of night, he took these bundles of wheat back over to Matthew's barn. Well, next morning, Matthew got up, looked, he said, gee, I have more wheat than I thought. And he counted them all out and he had more wheat than was half. And he thought, tonight, I'm going over to Douglas's house because he has a wife and family and more people to feed. And I will put more bundles of wheat there. And the next night, Douglas looked at his wheat and said, my gosh, I thought we divided the wheat evenly and I have so much more than Matthew. He deserves more. So I'm going to take the bundles of wheat back and forth. And each time they looked at the bundles of wheat, they thought they'd given them away, but they had the same amount. And they thought, the more I have, the more I give away, the more I seem to have. And so one night, in the dark of night, they put on bushels of wheat on their carts. And they moved toward one another's house to distribute more bundles of wheat. And then they came to the rise of a hill, like one of these Bristol hills here. And all of a sudden, the moon came out and they saw their brother taking wheat toward their farm. And they thought, oh, now we get it. We've been sharing with each other all the time and we didn't know it. And so, what do you suppose they named the place where they met and found out that the more they gave away, the more they had? What do you think they named that place?
I don't know.
What would you guess? Well, there are all kinds of guesses, but the one I know of, they called it the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, because that's where they found out the more they gave away, the more they had, and that this is a place for sharing what we have. And that is a story from the ancient Talmud, and that's the story behind this church. Thank you for being here.
For our joys and sorrows.
Oh,
Oh, sorry,
the offering?
the offering.
I
yes,
guess
sir.
we could do, it wouldn't matter either way. Sorry.
Nope, you're right. I now invite you into the spiritual practice of generosity. Donations from all of you is the primary way we fund the good work of this congregation. 1/4 of our plate this season goes to Metro Justice, an organization that seeks a better, more just world, free of economic, racial, and social injustice. You can give to this morning's offering by placing cash or check into the basket. Or if you are joining us from home, by visiting canandaiguauu.org/connection/donate. Or mailing a check to UUCC at 3024 Cooley Road, Canandaigua, New York, 14424. In either case, make a note that your gift is intended for today's offering. We now gratefully accept the offering. Okay, now I'm going to do the joys and sorrows. As many of you know, Cortland Bradley used to be a member of our church, and her son, Jack, has been going through cancer treatments. He just had surgery in New York City on his liver, and he's recovering. So please keep Jack in your thoughts. We're so happy to have Reverend Dick and his wife Joyce Gilbert here today. Thank you for coming. Go Bills! Woo! And at this time, the children can go down to childcare with Pat Bells.
Oh, now in peace, oh, now in peace, may the love of all surround you everywhere, everywhere you
I invite you now to become comfortable in your seats. If you're at home, whatever seat you have, I've often thought of this pandemic as being pajama preaching, because sometimes those of us who are preaching via Zoom and sitting in our offices at home in front of the computer are in our pajamas and to some extent. So, but I'm glad to be here with real live people. And hi to you folks sitting out at home. You're real live people too, but virtual to me now. So I invite you to get comfortable. You take a deep breath. It's been quite a week. Weeks to come will be perhaps even more hectic. And I invite you to settle down and join me in the spirit of prayer and meditation for a prayer of affirmation, pandemic fever, an antidote. There is something difficult about this particular time, in this particular climate, in this particular point of history. I feel it in myself. I sense it in those about me. I am just a little more impatient than usual. I am more often on edge. My spiritual resources feel depleted. I have pandemic fever. Partly it is the weather. Partly it is the endless divisiveness that grips our beloved nation. Partly it is nature that speaks back to us. Partly it is a pandemic that seems to have no end. We grow tired with the work we have to do and see no end to it. There are the tensions of an endless political meme season. Politicians pander, citizens protest, people are angry. There is melees in the land. What to do? Enjoy the spectacle of pure white snow on rolling hills, knowing that spring is not far behind. Read a good book. Talk with your legislators. Work on saving the world. Come to church, even if virtually. Remember, you can't save the world in a day. Be a little more patient with one another. Pandemic fever too will pass away. Let us be silent together. A few years ago, I received a very surprising postcard in the mail. It was from the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Missoula, Montana. They had used my sermon subscription series for their own Sunday worship services. And I was especially interested in one message on that particular postcard. Thank you for your soul-filled fanaticism. Blessings. Who, me? Soul-filled and fanaticism? I had often thought of myself as rather cerebral, with only occasional bursts of passion and even rarer showings of soul. But fanaticism, I really never thought of myself that way. My self-image is of the socially active preacher trying to live out the Hebrew prophets who spoke truth to power. I refuse to get very passionate about mixed spirituality or a fillet of soul. I invoke instead the Unitarian Universalist theologian James Luther Adams, who talked of the church as a spiritual center with a civic circumference. The deeper I probed, however, the more I began to understand what I think they meant. My soul is connected with my society. I translated then soul-filled fanaticism into engaged spirituality, which is a Buddhist construct. Personal spirituality and social action go together. They're not discrete. They are melded in human beings. Then I thought of particular human beings who embodied that engaged spirituality. These people have inspired me to critique the nation in which I happily live and move and have my being. After all, our fifth UU principle says we affirm the right of conscience and the use of the democratic method within our congregations and in society at large. Democracy is a religious principle. Sometimes I reverse the mandate, don't just stand there, do something, to a very different, don't just do something, stand there. And so I am standing here to reflect on the intersection of soul and society in our democracy. Spirituality has been defined as to separate the essential from the non-essential. Simple enough, but not really. Definitions really pale beside real life examples of spiritual human beings. And so I introduce you to several embodiments of engaged spirituality, people I have known in very different ways, as you will see, and have encouraged me to keep on keeping on. For in fact, yesterday, I attended the Metro Justice annual meeting to which this morning's offering is going. 65 of us. I think of the man from Maine who was asked if he believed in infant baptism. Believe in it, he said. I've seen it done. Believe in engaged spirituality. I've seen it done. We have no greater than the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who died yesterday at the age of 95. It was he who originated the term engaged spirituality. As a monk in Vietnam, he practiced a third way between the South Vietnam, supported by America, and the North Vietnamese. Nhat Hanh practiced Buddhist right living in a cooperative society, both in Vietnam and in Plum Village, France, as well as around the world. In May of 1967, I had dinner with Thich Nhat Hanh in Ithaca. at the invitation of a member of the Ithaca Unitarian Church, which I then served. George Cahan, chair of the Department of Southeast Asia Studies at Cornell, had invited Nhat Hanh to give a lecture on campus and wondered if I would like to join them for dinner. And we did, Joyce and I. He thought I would enjoy meeting Nhat Hanh, and indeed I did. Nhat Hanh was a diminutive figure, so small of body that I thought a stiff breeze off Cayuga Lake might blow him away. Yet he exuded charisma. His voice very soft, yet compelling. His views on the war and on human rights very compelling. How could he be so centered when he was living in the midst of this stalemate, this quagmire that was Vietnam? These two impulses, the inner spiritual and the outer ethical, merged in this one amazing human being. His masterful book, which perhaps some of you have read, The Miracle of Mindfulness, has been my meditation Bible. As I take my morning walk, I am mindful of being alive, being in nature. As I walk in protest at some injustice I see, I am aware of what I am doing, moving toward justice, I hope. As Nhat Hanh said, many people are alive, but don't touch the miracle of being alive. And then these wise words. Many of us have been running all our lives. Practice stopping. Practice stopping. Nhat Hanh spent his last days in Vietnam. As I say, he was 95 when he died. A second Ithaca encounter with engaged spirituality was Father Daniel Berrigan. From 1965 to 70, I was minister at the Ithaca Unitarian Church and chaplain at Cornell. Much to my surprise, Dan, radical priest that he was with his reputation, was hired by Cornell as associate director of Cornell United Religious Work, which met in what was called the God Box on campus, and Bell Taylor Hall across a courtyard from Myron Taylor Hall, the law school. What a combination. For nearly 4 years, I worked with Dan and was deeply moved by what he was and what he did. He spoke with a soft voice, but always underscored his very poetic words with his behavior. For example, he never locked the door of his apartment. If someone stole something, obviously they needed it more than did he. And then picture this, I even co-officiated with a wedding, at a wedding with Dan, a Unitarian Universalist Catholic wedding, 2 young UUs, in the coffee house at Annabelle Taylor Hall. I in suit, tie, and robe, very formal. Dan, the Catholic priest, in black turtleneck and chinos. It was quite a service. He was not only a powerful prophet, but an extraordinary poet, and I invited him to preach, which he did from the pulpit of the Unitarian Church in Ithaca. One day, Dan and I left an anti-draft rally in downtown Ithaca. We're walking up toward the Cornell campus. You know, there are hills there. As we chatted, Dan told me he was leaving town for a while to do an anti-war action. The next thing I knew, I was reading about and seeing a picture of Dan burning draft files in Catonsville, Maryland, as a war protest. Years later, a play called The Trial of Catonsville 9 came out, and it was produced at the First Unitarian Church of Rochester, which I then served. It was very interesting that the young man from Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School who portrayed Dan Berger in that play, later became a UU minister. But I digress. After the Catonsville action, Dan, well, he was on the lam and pursued by the FBI. Agents even came to my office to interrogate me about his whereabouts. Fortunately, I had no clue. But Dan kept popping up in churches, preaching, and then disappearing again. One of those pop-ups was at Barton Hall, the ROTC building at Cornell University. I was a reader in a peace Seder service, Passover Seder, before about 10,000 people who had been amassed in that huge barn of a building, including, I am sure, a number of FBI agents, because it was rumored that Dan might put in an appearance. And indeed, he did. When we referenced the empty chair set aside for the prophet Elijah to return, Dan swept onto the stage to a tumultuous applause and cheering, gave a passionate anti-war speech, and then just as quickly, he disappeared. Eventually, he was apprehended and incarcerated. But I saw Dan one more time before he died. He was awarded the Aiden Ballou Peace Award from the Aiden Ballou UU Peace Fellowship. Our final meeting was at Cornell, when he came back for a kind of reunion with all those people with whom he had worked over those 4 tumultuous years. Think of it, 65 to 70, 66 to 70, thereabouts. It was a pretty raucous time. I will never forget his response to one very difficult question from a member of the audience who listened to Dan. Father Berrigan, don't you ever despair? To which Dan replied without pause, despair is a luxury beyond my means. Despair is a luxury beyond my means. That has been one of my mantras going forward. Dan died in 2016 at the age of 94. More recently, I have been saddened at the death of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a dedicated anti-apartheid activist. He chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Commission there, which tried to bring together the warring factions, the Afrikaner whites who had dominated that culture, and the subservient Black people who had endured it and were now coming into liberation together. Tutu was a happy warrior. I can still hear his high-pitched laughter. You see, we had one personal encounter with Desmond Tutu. One night in May of 1985, I had a call from a fellow member of the Rochester Committee for Justice in Southern Africa. Desmond Tutu was flying into town to address the graduates at the University of Rochester. He'd be at the airport very briefly. Would I be interested in meeting him? Our children were in pajamas, ready for bed, but we gathered them up and the 4 of us took off for the airport, where we had 5 or 10 minutes with Bishop Tutu. There he was, diminutive, but dynamic. I reached out to shake his hand and I was stunned. His hand was so soft, I was afraid I would crush it. And yet, what a heart the man had. You are saying you care, he told the graduates. You say you care, you say, and isn't it marvelous? You say there are alternatives, that we can have a society which is not grasping, which is not rough and hard. A society that is compassionate, that is caring, a society that is sharing, a society that says it matters to be human. Tutu not only protested apartheid, but supported GLBTQ rights and many more controversial issues, which greatly disturbed many of the people of South Africa. But he did it always as a smiling prophet. As I learned when we went finally to South Africa and met some of his partners in peace and reconciliation. I learned that justice making is not so much a drab duty as a joyous journey. But where, you ask, are the women prophets? My choice may surprise you. Susan B. Anthony. Now, actually, contrary to what you might think, despite my age, I never really knew Susan B. She died in 1906. But I am writing a book about her. No Consorting with Angels, the spiritual life of Susan B. Anthony. Born a Quaker, she joined the Unitarian Church in Rochester, where she spent 50 years gathering their support, the support of that community in her campaigns, her various campaigns. What made her tick over that lifetime, traveling as she did in difficult conditions in the 19th century mostly? A woman laughed at, spit upon, despised by many, even by many women. What made her tick? That is what I am trying to find out. Her incredible commitment must have required a kind of spiritual adrenaline that did not dissipate with defeat, but understood that one's social justice goals may not be achieved during one's lifetime. Susan B. Anthony was not a mystic. As her dear friend Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, to her, work is worship. In Anthony's letter to spiritualist Annie Besant, she urged her to join the suffrage movement on earth rather than soaring to the stars and consorting with the angels. Susan B. Anthony's engaged spirituality moves me yet as I write. Nevertheless, she persisted. Another mantra in my life. So in this review of engaged spirituality, I have learned that social justice commitments are another way of working on our spirituality. We cheat ourselves if we neglect the spiritual growth that comes from social action in the world. My personal mission is to grow a soul, to love and to be loved, and to help repair a broken world. They are part and parcel of what I try to be and to do. The one infuses the other. From spiritual gratitude, I set out to make a small change in the world. As I try to change the world, I experience the spiritual. The spiritual and the social are part of the same movement of the soul. It will be no news to you that we Americans are moving through a very difficult period. Between elections, in a not yet post-pandemic period, what might have been the Trump bump of our activism in reacting to the 45th president of the United States is in danger of becoming the Trump slump. Many of us are exhausted from those already difficult, deadly years and the seismic crises we are living with now. Increased income inequality, deepened racism and homophobia, a recognition of the fragility of our democracy, and of course, as if all this weren't enough, the danger of global climate change. Just to watch the PBS NewsHour, as we do every night, is enough to tempt one to retire from the field. However, we cannot and must not become mere injustice collectors, jumping on the grievance conveyor belt, shouting about the coming apocalypse. We cannot abide what seems to be the end of empathy in our nation. And while every day brings us something to another blow to our great democratic experiment, that cannot be the last word. We cannot be apocalyptic. I think of the cartoon of a man in sackcloth walking down the street with a sign that read, "The world is not coming to an end. Therefore, we must suffer along and learn to cope. And so must we." We cannot become mere sideline spectators, but must instead be about the business of beating swords into ballots, beating plowshares into economic justice, treating the earth as a garden to be tended rather than a mine to be exploited. We need to recognize, cherish, and defend a woman's right to choose, now under great peril. We need to persuade the unvaccinated that the supposed freedom they invoke threatens the very lives of their neighbors. We need to build a spiritual infrastructure if we are to create a moral infrastructure in our nation. Great ships, I have been told, are moored in the harbor, but that is not what they are for. Languishing in the harbor of pessimism is not what we are for. Democracy, we have learned, is not for the faint of heart. It is fragile and needs constant care. And it teeters now on the razor's edge of existence. As one political philosopher said, who in their right mind would choose the dull responsibilities of democracy over the instant gratification a demagogue will provide? The discouraged will say, if you want to hear the gods laugh, tell them your plans. Humbled though I am by those words, I respond with the words of the Arab mystic Rumi. Start a huge, foolish project, like Noah. We were made for times like this. I leave you with an image that has seared itself into my spirit, into my soul. It is the story of Judy Wells, a friend and ministerial colleague who died at the age of 77 on September 28th, 2020, of cancer. She and her minister husband had moved to Oregon because of Oregon's medical aid in dying legislation, which enables one to order a cocktail if one has only 6 months to live. A doctor provides a drug cocktail which causes death. And the person who receives the cocktail chooses the time and place that she wants. When her suffering became too much to bear, she obtained this life-ending cocktail from her doctor. She had so wanted to vote in the 2020 election. But as the time neared, she knew she would never make it. And so on the morning of her last day of life, she wrote 15 letters to people in Pennsylvania, urging them to vote. That afternoon, she took her drug cocktail and died in the arms of her family. Friends, these are tough times. Many of us have spent a lifetime seeking goals that are now in question. They're now under siege. It is easy to become impatient. Many of us are tired, but this is no time for despair. It is time for our own version of engaged spirituality, or if you prefer, soul-filled fanaticism. So say Thich Nhat Hanh, Dan Berrigan, Desmond Tutu, Susan B. Anthony, and Judy Wells, and a whole host of others. What say you. Amen.
Prepare your spirit to repair this broken world which we share. When justice and compassion flow, your faith is strengthened and will grow.
I close with these words from Marge Percy. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who stand in the line and haul in their places, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears in the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water and a person for work that is real. Our closing hymn is number 348, Guide My Feet.
God, my feet
Please join me in our words for extinguishing the chalice. If you don't know them by heart, they can be found at number 456 at the back of the gray hymnal. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.